be talking about ordering rational numbers. We're going to be doing that using something called benchmarking. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first example. Now here we are in example A, and it says, how can we use benchmarking to put these numbers in order from least to greatest? And I've got 8%, I've got 19/20ths, and I got 0.55. So none of those are the same type of number, so that's going to make it a little complicated. Now, I did learn last class that I know how to convert these all to different numbers, and that might be helpful. But let's see if we can figure it out with just using a little reasoning and a few questions that we have here to answer. So the first one says, which is the closest to 0? So if I'm looking at these numbers, I've got 8%, 19/20ths, so 19 is really close to 20th, or really close to being a whole, and 0.55 kind of in the middle. So I think the one that's closest to 0 is the 8%. I mean, 8% is not a lot. If you got an 8% on a quiz, you would not be very happy. That would be almost to 0. Then it says which one is the closest to a half. So if I know it's not 8% because that one was the closest to 0, so now I've got 19/20ths, so almost 20, and 0.55. Well, 0.55 is close to 0.5, which I know is a half, so I'm going to say the closest one to a half is 0.55. Then which one is closest to 1 whole? Now granted, I only have one number left to do this, but I think that 19 being close to 20 is almost 1 whole, so I'm going to say 19/20ths. So what is our correct order then if we're going from least to greatest? Well, I know the one that's closest to 0, that's going to be 8%, is going to be first. Then I know the one that's closest to 1/2 is going to be next, so 0.55. And then the one that's closest to a whole will be after that, so 19/20ths. So there I go. I've got them in order from least to greatest, and I didn't have to do any converting. I didn't have to do any long division. I was able to use reasoning to get through this problem. Let's see if it works in other situations. Let's look at example B. So here in example B, I've got 3 more numbers that it wants me to use benchmarking for to put in least and greatest, and I've got only 2 questions to use this time. Let's see if those are helpful. So I've got which one is closest to 0 out of my 11/20ths, 0.09, and 45%. Well, if I'm thinking about it, although there are 3 different kinds, 0.09 is really close to 0. It's 9/100ths is a very small number. So I think that one is going to be the one that's closest to 0. Then which one is closest to a half? Well, 45% is almost a half, and 11/20ths is a little more than half. So I think the one that's a little more than half, 10 out of 20 would be half. 11 out of 20 is just one more than that, so I think that's the one that's closest to a half. So what is the correct order based on this? Well, I know that 0.09 is the one closest to 0, so I'm going to say that one goes first. Then I've got 45% and 11/20ths. Well, I know 11/20ths is a little more than half, and I know 45% is a little less than half. So the one that's a little less than half is going to be next. And then I know that the only one that I have left, or the one that's a little more than half, 11/20ths, is going to be the last one. So then again, I was able to put them in correct order from least to greatest, and I didn't have to do any long division. I didn't have to do any converting. I could use my brain and reasoning to determine least to greatest. Let's take a look at the next one. So here we are in example C, and again, it's got 3 numbers. We need to put them in order from least to greatest, and it's got some questions for us. So we got 6/2, 5.12, and 90%. So the first question is, which is the one that is less than 1? Well, 6 is more than 2, so that's not going to be less than 1. 5.12, obviously not less than 1. 90%. 100% would be 1, so 90% less than that, so I know 90% is the one that's less than 1. So how can I determine what comes next? I've got 5.12, and I've got 6/2. Well, good news. 6 divided by 2 works out evenly. If you divide 6 by 2, you get that equals 3. So if I know that equals 3, then I know that's going to be less than the 5.12. So I know I can put the correct order in at 90%, because that's the one that's less than 1, so that's going to go first. Then I know 6/2 is going to come next, because I know 3 is less than 5. And then finally, we're going to be finishing up with 5.12. Let's take a look at the last example. So this one says practice, but I think we're going to practice together. It says, how can you use reasoning, put these numbers in order from least to greatest? So again, I got 3/10, -2.4, -6%, and 0.85. So I've got some negatives and some positives here. So when I'm putting numbers in order from least to greatest, which kind of numbers should come first? Well, in this case, I should put the negatives first, right? The negatives are automatically going to be smaller than the positive numbers, no matter what. So let's take a look at some other things. So which one is the furthest away from 0? So if I'm looking at the one that's furthest away from 0, I've got -0.85, that's, almost to 1. -6%, that's, a very small amount of percentage. It'll be right up against 0. 3/10, again, it's going to be really, really close to 1, but the one that's going to be the furthest away from 0, -2.4. Out of all these numbers is going to be almost double and plus further away from 0. So I know that -2.4 is going to be the one that's going to go away from 0. 0. So how do we order our positives? Well, I've got 3/10 and 8.5. So hopefully 3/10 works out evenly enough that we know that 3/10 is equal to 0.3. I know that that looks like 3/10. So if I know that one's 3/10 and the other one's 0.85, I know the 0.85 is going to be much larger than the 0.3. So what's our correct order? So I know that negative 2.4 being the furthest away from 0 is going to be the one that is going to be the smallest. Then I only have one other negative number, so I know that one's going to come next, the negative 6%. So then I just talked about how 3/10 is going to be smaller than 0.85, or you can look at it as getting a 30% a lot worse than getting an 85% on something. So I know 3/10 is going to be next. And finally, I'm going to be finishing up with 0.85. So there, I was able to put those all in order with minimum amount of mathematical effort. I needed to take the 3/10 to 0.3, but maybe I knew that without doing too much math. But hopefully this shows a way to put things in order from least to greatest without having to do too many conversions. This brings us to the end of this video. So if you like this video, go ahead and smack that like button. If you love this video, go ahead and throw us a sub, and we will catch you in the next one.